Thank you for that introduction. Uh, Again, we meet with a series of lectures on more comprehensive nutrition. And you may be wondering why I would go to this, particularly for our lay audience. And there's a dimension of that question I want to bring before you, because more than 30 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine, in the letters to the editor, a medical school professor wrote a very short note and said basically we should study and try to maximize the placebo effect in human research, because such links investigators have to go to try to eliminate the influence of the placebo effect, because it's not a false effect. It is a effect of what the body can do on its own. And primarily, if it's found out, it's by what you think and believe. So this is, as you see here, the placebo. It's the good things that can happen because of what you think, know, believe, and have faith in. Just the opposite of that is the nocebo effect, which is deleterious effect that can happen because of errors or falsehood that you believe in, and it can do deleterious benefit to the body. And we're trying to, pardon me, maximize the effect that it's called the so-called placebo effect, what the body can do on its own, because they know that we have in the brain a biocomputer, and its function is the mind, and the mind controls and influences everything physical, mental, and emotional that happens in the body. And a lot of this has to do with how cellular synthesis under the control of the genes, which are influenced by your thoughts for their expression, to improve your health. And in my basic medical training, I can give you two examples. When I was a junior medical student, we were sent to a veteran hospital to live in the bachelor officers area for 3 months. And we were on a ward. I was assigned to a ward that had layers of beds, 10 down one side, 10 down the other, a total of 10 veterans that were in the hospital for various problems. We had a resident and an office there in this area, and we would rotate to the students would to be present at night when the resident and the staff man were gone, and we had a pager for them if we needed them. But that's the way it was set up. Well, one night I was there, and it got to be after, say, 10 o'clock. And one of the patients had pancreatitis. And I've never had pancreatitis, but I understand it's a terrible, painful, burning, boring, center of the body pain. And he began to cry out for pain medication. And his orders were written he shouldn't have any more pain medication till 12 o'clock that night. And he got louder and louder, and it just, the screaming of pain was painful to you to hear it, but it was upsetting the other 19 people in bed. I was afraid something terrible was going to happen because they were hollering at him to shut up and all. So I went to the nurse, because we could not get the resident or staff man to respond. I didn't have a medical license. I couldn't write any orders for pain. And I asked her what he was getting for pain, and she said Dilaudid, and that's a synthesized opiate, and it wasn't time for it. And I says, what does it feel like when they inject it, and how do they inject it? She says, well, with a needle, with a syringe, about 5 cc. And I said, when it's injected, is there any feeling? And she said, yes. And I says, like saline or still water? She said, no, it's more like a Ringer's lactate. It has a little burn to it. And I said, well, would you draw up some Ringer's lactate in this 5 cc syringe? So I went to the patients and I put my hand on his shoulder and in a calm voice, looked eyeball to eyeball. And I said, you've been hollering out wanting something. Well, I've got something for you here. And so I stuck the needle in, and very superficially, because there's more pain fibers in the superficial skin before putting it deeper. And he got the feeling he was used to. And before I even got it all injected, he said, oh, thank you, doc. Thank you, doc. Oh, thank you. Thank you. And not only was he relieved from his pain, but he went to sleep. And so everybody else in the ward good. Well, I never forgot that, because that was totally an example of very desirable placebo effect. All he had to do is to think, and he even had the endurance of the pain of the injection, and his pain was relieved. Later, I was in pathology residency, and I had there on the autopsy table a 32-year-old LVN who was Afro-American, looked very normal. And what was very unusual about this is that the students, the residents in training, 4 years level, were all down wanting to observe this autopsy, which they seldom ever came before, but they wanted to see what I could find. And what they told me is that 3 days before, she arrived at the emergency room and said, I'm going to die. And she died. All the blood drawing, radiologic examinations they could do, they could find nothing wrong with her. There was nothing they could do, but she died, and they wanted to see what was wrong. Well, I did a very meticulous autopsy, and I could find absolutely nothing wrong. And so everybody was shaking their heads, and certainly I was wondering what was going on. But since she was LVN, I went to the ward and found out someone had known her. And I found out she had been in a triangular relationship over a male. And this other female was hostile toward her. And she had found in her home a doll, straw doll, with some of her hair from some way the person had gotten it, and had a big needle stuck into it. And with that, she was scared to death. And so she went to an individual that came to our hospital who was about 6'6" tall and had a tall headpiece he wore, must have went up to about 8 feet. He wore a purple robe and all. He was a faith healer. And she wanted him to help her and take this hex off of her. And he said, well, he wouldn't show much. And so she finally gave him $200, and he went to work on it. And finally, he told her, the power is too great. I can't take the hex away. Well, she went home after working one day, and her shower turned red like blood. And with that, she was so terrified, she came to the hospital and said, I'm going to die. And she did. And that is an example of the nocebo effect that I had in my personal relationship. And so over the years, maybe in the future, we might go into more detail. I'm reading a book on the research that has been done on the placebo effect. But the point I wanted to make is I want you to know that the science has been done to show the power of nutrition to restore health. And if you know this, there will be people, particularly in our society, that think there's the only thing that can improve your health is a prescription drug. Well, that's not true. Nutrition, supplying what your genes require in cellular synthesis to make bioactive molecules to move to the normal zone, is extremely powerful. And if you know the science has been done from the benefits you may hear of people getting, you will get a better effect, quicker, faster, more complete. And that's one of the reasons we go through these lectures, so that you will know and your mind can trigger in harmony with the more comprehensive nutrition that's available in the dietary supplements. Well, with this, we will go to the next PowerPoint lecture, and I hope you bring it into your biocomputer in your brain that the science has been done, which I will share with you. In this lecture, we will be talking about one of the ingredients that is in the New Eden that we call this dietary supplement. That's the results of now into the 37th year of what I've been learning. It all started out, as I've told you before, with a middle of the road science and medicine, working with the FDA to develop a new drug. As this has moved on, it's turned into a spiritual journey to learn that in nature, all the molecules that our genes call for to make bioactive structure and function molecules are present. And in this lecture, we'll talk about Humate. And as you will see, as I describe it, that there are over 60 elements in it and the importance of these elements. And we will just focus on selenium. But as we move on, I will recall for you that this is a chart of all the elements that have been found on Earth and in space. And the simplest is over to the left at the top is hydrogen, which has an atomic number 1, an atomic weight of a little over 1. It is the simplest element. Over to your right, in the next to last column, you'll see 0 there at the top for oxygen, then beneath it, S for sulfur. And then the third one down is 34 selenium, which has 34 electrons. The atomic number is the number of electrons that circle around the nucleus. And in the nucleus combined with this, it's about a 79 atomic weight. And everything that happens in the body is done with these molecules. And the most interesting thing is not one of these elements have any property of life, but our cells can take them, and through cellular synthesis and code that's in DNA, life comes into existence. Now, at this point in time, the analytical chemists tell us there are 66 elements in Humate, and we don't want to go through all of them, but I wanted to take one as an example, and then about 5 from the bottom to the end of the list, you see Se for selenium, and that selenium in natural sources is high in Brazil nuts, in salmon, and in organ meat, in particular liver. If you eat chicken livers or beef livers or any type of liver, is a good source of selenium. And in fact, virtually all the elements, it's a unusually good source because the small, almost undetectable amount of these elements that may be present in plant kingdom are concentrated in animal tissues. Now, this is an example to get across to you that bioactive compounds have a element added to it, which we'll show before, but the amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals don't work without this trace amount of mineral. And one of the best examples is hemoglobin that has an element of iron in it. And you'll see that it has tetraporoles around it made up of hydrogens and carbons, and that attached to the nitrogens that are in the molecule, you have iron. Well, very interesting to me is that the molecule for chlorophyll, which is above it there and has a green circle around it, has magnesium where there's iron in chlorophyll, and chlorophyll does not capture energy from the sun if it doesn't have the magnesium molecule in it. Well, this is something that's a fact that is repeated again and again in bioactive complex molecules. For example, in vitamin C, at the far right, we see that in nature, the original discoverer of it called it vitamin C complex. And in fact, at the periphery of it, it has 4 vitamin C's. Then it has bioflavonoids and different factors, but within it is the tyrosinase, and a trace of copper is present in tyrosinase, and the clinical benefits of vitamin C don't exist without this little bit of copper in it. One of the trace minerals that I'd shown you in the previous list that are in Humate. Also, the largest organ in the human body is frequently missed, that the dermis and epidermis combined are the largest organ in the human body as far as a mass and number of cells. And vitamin E is extremely important to the function of the skin, and that is where selenium is present. If you see down at the vitamin E that you see at the center there of this complex molecule that's made in nature, you've got to have selenium, and we're using it as an example of all the elements. And I might add, is sensitivity for detecting elements increases, they found more and more trace minerals in Humate. But at this time, they can find with the technology 66 trace molecules. Now, Humate is not the only source for trace minerals, but there's a great difference between Humate and other sources. One of the things in dietary supplements and in fertilizers for plants is Okinawan coral minerals. And there are 70 plus minerals because in the ocean, seawater, the living little cells in coral have access from water that glaciers grind away on mountains down to rivers that go out to the ocean. All the minerals that are present in the mountains, but it's in the inorganic phase. That means it is not attached, the mineral isn't, or the element, to an amino acid or a fatty acid or a carbohydrate molecule. Another source for trace minerals is in Utah, they have wells that go down deep, and they run hot water down there to dissolve salt from ancient seas, and this has over 70 minerals. Again, it's inorganic. The elements are not attached to the organic molecules. Another source for minerals is volcanic ash, such as covered the northwestern United States when Mount Helena exploded. But these minerals that come from the volcano, again, are not attached to an organic molecule, and they're just bare. However, looking into the Japanese literature, the humate comes from a layer of plant material in mines that the plants grew at a time when volcanoes were common on Earth, and in the air they covered the land, and the plant took the elements in the ash and incorporated them into the leaves and the material of the plant. And these molecules are attached to a carbohydrate molecule, typically complex sugars. And being in the organic phase, it is more available when it is ingested as a dietary supplement to enter into cellular metabolism. All your inorganics have to be processed to be attached and elevated to be at a higher energy level to be organic. Well, it's already organic in the humate, which is one of the nice things. Now, I have a book here from Russia of how they analyzed cells by fractionating the structures in the cell, and that the trace minerals are at highest level of concentration in the third step of cellular synthesis in the Golgi. And we will briefly review from the past that every cell has in it a little assembly line that the cartoon that you see there of the cell that says DNA and the nucleus, that's about what you can see with a light microscope at 1,000 magnification. But you've got to greatly increase the magnification, use special stains to see the organelles that look like they're in empty space inside the cytoplasm of the cell. And the first step is the ribosome, the second is endoplasmic reticulum, frequently called the ER, and the three, the Golgi. And the Golgi is where the highest concentration of these trace metal elements are. And this is, in my mind, kind of like the final stage of synthesis to finish things off, to make all the structure function molecules. And they attach, like for hemoglobin, the iron, for vitamin E, you have the selenium that has to be attached to make all the structure function molecules of the body. And of course, in the center is the biochemistry of where they found this published article in Annual Reviews of Biochemistry, 1985, that it shows that in the second step that 9 molecules of allo-acetylated mannose, better known as ace-mannan, in 3 chains are on the surface of all the cells. And this is a domain for cell-to-cell communication. But we're emphasizing in this thing that bioactive molecules have to have a metallic cation or positively charged element to finish off their structure to have a bioactivity. Now, selenium is only one of over 60 trace minerals in humate. And this layer is kind of like, well, it's like very soft coal. It has not been compressed enough by the layers of earth to form soft coal or heavy, dense coal, anthracite coal. And humate that we get is unique in that when it was formed, fresh water came into the plants in the layer instead of seawater, because if seawater comes into a humate, you have heavy metals that are toxic. And fortunately, this mine that we get this humate from doesn't have these toxic metals that can be deleterious to the health. And as I said, the Japanese literature has studied humate in great detail, and it's hooked, the elements are hooked to the organic molecule or matrix, and it's more available for cellular metabolism. Now, selenium, as I showed you on the composition of matter chart, has 34 electrons, which is an atomic number, and an atomic weight of 79, which the dense particles at the center of the cell, which the electrons will rotate around in the model that we have for it now, and it's in vitamin E. And vitamin E has benefits for vision, for reproduction, for blood composition, for brain function. And inside the cell, it acts as a antioxidant because the process of rancid butter and peanut butter goes on inside the cell, called oxidation, when oxygen molecules, O2, are split to O1. And you don't want this oxygen attaching to membranes, or especially you don't want it attaching to chromosomes, which can cause a mutation. So this vitamin E with selenium can neutralize the oxidative process. Again, we want to function. The reason we chose selenium is that it's so important in the skin, which is the largest organ of the human body for the number of cells and mass of human cells. And the skin is so important for retention of fluids and electrolytes. They don't leak out of the body. It's an impervious layer. It's for protection against microscopic insect, infectious agents, bacteria, fungus, and viruses. It also, the skin is a cushion to the joints and the bones and the muscles. And the skin is active in regulating our temperature. Most people are aware that if we get too hot, the skin begins to let fluid through the sweat glands. It evaporates and reduces your temperature. And in the cold weather, the skin capillaries will constrict and shunt the blood to the deeper parts of the body so you don't lose your temperature. And of course, the skin is the source for the ends of many nerves to feel so that we can avoid trauma. So those are the general functions, and it's a host barrier against all these deleterious effects that if we didn't have skin, we'd be in a lot of trouble in our environment. Now I'm going to go to an important study that was published in the Journal of American Nutraceutical Association in the winter of 1999. And it is the first published peer-reviewed formal study done on selenium. And when I say a formal study, that very seldom is a double-blind, placebo-controlled study done. And this was done on a dietary source of this element. And we'll go into some of the details because during the pandemic, you've heard a lot of comments. There's no proof that something is of value against the coronavirus. Well, what they're saying is it wasn't a random assigned computer. Only it knows which patients are in the intervention group and which patients are in the placebo group. And furthermore, the investigators are even blinded so that they don't know which patients are getting an inactive agent versus supplied selenium. And we'll give a little bit of details of what these very expensive, you're talking about at least $1 million to even consider doing such a study. And that's not enough for this study, which went 10 years. Now, here is the title of this paper, A Decreased Instance of Prostate Cancer with Selenium Supplementation. And it's the results of a double-blind cancer prevention trial. And I emphasize this study because all these people are independent of the source for the selenium in this study. They're from University of Arizona and the Miami Miller School of Medicine. And all the hope that they have no personal interest in this, they're just trying to find out the truth about selenium in regard to prostate cancer. Now, if you've never seen prostate cancer, I've got in the pink in the center here, normal cancer prostate. And if you can see its glands, it makes a secretion that's part of the fluid of ejaculation. And you see cuboidal cells very well organized around the gland, and stroma where blood vessels, capillaries bring in oxygen and take away waste, and it's all well organized. Over to the left, you'll see a low-grade prostate cancer. It's not as deeply stained, but you'll see that there's very little stroma, that the glands are sitting on top of each other, and they vary greatly in their size, and the normal anatomic structure has been altered a modest amount. Over to the far right, you see a highly malignant prostate cancer, which they try to grade these from 1 to 10. And this is in the 8, 9, or 10. Very malignant. You can see the stroma is overgrown. They're islands of poorly shaped, darkly staining cells. Some of them are kind of a little solid sheet rather than a lumen in the center. But when we talk about prostate cancer, when they send the tissue to the pathology laboratory, this is what is looked for and what was involved in these patients that were studied. Now, this is an example that prostate cancer is nothing to fool around with. This is an individual in North Dallas, and you'll see some white spots in the lung. Well, each of these white spots were metastatic prostate tumor to the lung and to the mediastinum, which is the structures between the lungs, and it was biopsied with special stains. It was just like the prostate cancer that had been down in the prostate gland, but this is just an example of how bad it can get. This is a typical study. I'm sorry it's not more definite, because this is a bone scan to detect tumor. And to the far left, you can see some dark spots in the ribs, on the top of the head, and in the pelvis and the spinal column. With more comprehensive nutrition for a year, with the active ingredient from aloe, you will notice at the far right that you can barely tell. Fact is, the tumor that was on the top of the skull is gone. The darkest spot at the bottom is contrast media in the urinary bladder, so it's not in the bones. And you can see that there's been a marked improvement of a reduction of the uptake of the isotope by more comprehensive nutrition given to the cells that programmed in the genes is the information to seek out abnormal cells, attack and destroy them, and liquefy them and eradicate them. Now, in that table of the article from the New England Journal of the American Nutraceutical Association, this is just some characteristics of the two groups, and I'm going through this to superficially let you know what a very expensive random assigned in the where it says SC, that's the selenium group, and over to the right it says placebo. There were 479 in the intervention group to get the selenium, and the placebo group that didn't get increased selenium, 495, similar size. The average age of the two groups, the computer does this to try to make each, the 495 and the 479, as close to the same ages as possible. And then they did selenium's levels in people's serum, and you can see they were virtually the same at the initiation of the study. And then they did the PSA, the prostate-specific antigen level, and you can see they were very similar to show that the study groups are very similar. And then they go into the details of the selenium at the bottom, levels in the different patients, again, trying to ensure that the two groups that are going to be tested as much like as possible before you do the supplementation. Now, this was the summary after 10 years of following these patients, which makes it a very, very expensive study. And they, over the 10 years, they have the personal years of those that got the selenium and those that got the placebo, and the statistical evaluation of them, also their prostate specific antigen levels. And there were 7 cases of prostate cancer developed in the selenium group, but 28 in the placebo group that they tried to be as close to the similarity as they could to start out with. And then they have the levels of the prostate specific levels of those patients that did develop the cancer. Now, the minimum daily allowance for selenium that the FDA recommends is 70 micrograms recommended daily allowance. In the Southern food chain, that this averages about 90 micrograms per day, but in the test patients, just those that got the supplement of selenium, they gave them 200 micrograms a day for those 10 years. And they got a 63% reduction in prostate cancer over this 10-year period in the group that was getting selenium. However, there was a total reduction of all kinds of cancers, including the lung and the colon, because the colon cancers are much more common than prostate cancer. There was also a 17% reduction in all causes of death. And those with the initial low serum levels were higher risk for cancer and also for all-cause mortality. Now, the significance of this study, this is the first placebo-controlled, random assigned 2 groups, double-blind, meaning the patients nor the doctors knew which were getting the selenium and which were not, study. That's what is called the gold standard. Very few of them are done because they're so expensive. I don't know how many $1 million this study cost or who paid for it. Anyway, this was the first formal study to show that dietary supplementation can prevent cancer. And this selenium molecule was what was studied, and it reduced all cancers. Now, at this point, I need to point out that selenium is not a pharmaceutical, and it's federal law that only a pharmaceutical drug approved by the FDA can be claimed to correct an abnormal health condition. So I have tried to develop what I'm going to share with you, a viewpoint and philosophy, because you should never violate federal law. The penalties are very significant. And in fact, the FDA is charged with attacking anybody making claims to improve health with anything other than a pharmaceutical drug. Now, this is what I'm going to offer to you to think about. It has not been tested in a altercation with the FDA, but nutrition only supports normal nutrient supply for normal cellular assembly of normal bioactive compounds that conduct normal biochemistry and physiology of the much larger cell population of the body of normal human cells. The emphasis is on the normal, and that there are more normal cells in the human body if you've got a cancer, in particular if it's a prostate cancer. So all you're doing is focusing on the normal cells, whereas my position on this is that the medical people are treating the population of the abnormal cells, and that their toxic agents are focused against the population of abnormal cells that have abnormal activity, and that nutrition only supports the function of normal cells in the human body. And that's very important to not violate federal law. And I hope that you get the idea of how important trace minerals are to be a small part of the structure of bioactive molecules. And we use selenium as one of the multiple trace metals, elements in Humate. And with that, we think we have stopped the recording.